She didn't move when the voice cracked through the air like a blade. Not right away. Not in front of the men who were already waiting for her to stumble. The courtyard was still. Sunlight slanted across stone, rifles glinted, boots stayed rooted, aligned, perfect. Every breath seemed measured, every second stretched. The old guard's steps echoed like a metronome counting down the end of something. Her name, sharp in the air, carried more weight than it should have, and she knew it. Was this just a test, or something else? Her eyes remained fixed forward, unblinking, not on the man packing before them, not on the tourists pressed against the rope line, their chatter rising and falling like waves. Her eyes stayed locked on the flag, tall, heavy, whispering in the faint wind, because if she looked anywhere else they would see it, the flicker, the break, the thing she carried that none of them could ever understand. They thought she was a visitor in this world, a guest in a uniform, a tourist who stumbled too close to a tradition carved in centuries of discipline. But she was. She had already bled for this. She had already lost more than any of them standing here could imagine. And now, with one wrong breath, one misstep, she could lose again. The guard's command struck once more, hard, final. A demand, a challenge. Her hands twitched at her sides, not from fear. Fear was something she had learned to lock away years ago. This was something else, a tremor born of memory. She could hear it again, the desert wind clawing across a rooftop, the dry crack of gunfire echoing through night, the sound of her brother's laughter on a radio just hours before it fell silent forever. She had never told them about that letter, the one folded into her pocket the day she deployed, the one stained with desert dust and grief. She never told anyone why she volunteered when no one asked her to. Now standing here, she felt the letter's weight again, even though it was long gone, burned with his belongings, buried in silence. Her chest rose once, held, she stepped forward. One movement, one deliberate answer to everything hanging in the air. But inside her, the war never stopped. It had begun years before, not here but thousands of miles away. She had been younger then, though not by much. A sniper with steady hands, trusted by her unit more than she trusted herself. That night was supposed to be routine. A road check outside a village. Clear skies, nothing moving but the wind. She was their eyes from above, her scope trained, her breath slowed. The world narrowed into a single circle of glass. Then the call came over comms. 2 men hit, one bleeding out, a shadow darting from the corner of her lens. A boy not more than 12, something in his hand. She hesitated. For 1 second she hesitated. And then she fired. Her bullet struck true, too true. She lived. Her team lived. But when she climbed down from that rooftop, the silence that met her wasn't relief. It was a question no one asked aloud. Was it right? Was it necessary? Was it unforgivable? She carried the answer inside her ever since. And though no one had spoken it, though no one had blamed her outright, she blamed herself. It was easier that way. That night broke something she never repaired. It built the wall she lived behind now, the silence that made her seem cold, untouchable. Even as the guard's stare pressed into her, even as the tourists whispered, she thought of that rooftop, of that boy, and she wondered if every step since then had been an attempt to answer for it. The old guard turned. His steps were slow, deliberate. His boots struck the stone like the beat of a clock running out. What if she broke now? What if the silence inside her split wide open, spilling the truth she buried in her chest? Her fingers brushed the seam of her trousers. The thread was rough, biting into her palm. She needed that bite, needed the pain to remind her she was here, not there. She tried to breathe, just once, just enough. Then the guard's hand flicked, a gesture so small most missed it, but she saw it. She always saw the tiny details others let slip. Move. Her body responded before her mind caught up. Her boots hit stone, her shoulders squared. And for the first time in too long, she felt something lighten inside her. Discipline, order, the comfort of following instead of leading. But then, a cough, sharp, cruel, from the back of the crowd. Laughter followed, quick, stifled, ugly. Her chest tightened, her teeth pressed together. She knew it was meant for her, for the outsider, the woman in a place they thought didn't belong to her. Did they know what it cost her to stand here? Did they know she buried her brother alone because no one else would? That she folded the flag herself, hands shaking, tears choking her, because they sent no honor guard? Did they know she walked away from the only family she had left just to keep serving? That she carried silence like armor, because words would only break her? No, to them she was just the tourist, the outlier, a uniform that didn't fit. Her jaw locked, her breath stilled. She wanted, for one dangerous second, to turn and meet their eyes, to let them see what discipline cost, to burn through their laughter with the fire she had buried so long. But discipline is not rage. Discipline is silence. She chose silence. And when she did, something shifted, something small, invisible to most, but not to the old guard. His eyes flickered, just for a moment. Recognition, not pity, not sympathy, recognition. And she understood. That was when the step came. Forward. Closer. Into the shadow of the flag. The air changed, it grew heavier. Tourists went still, even the ones who mocked. Somewhere a child's voice asked a question in a language she couldn't place. It echoed faint, soft like a bell. Every sound magnified, the scrape of boots, the whisper of fabric, the faint hum of wind threading through stone. Her pulse matched it, steady, mechanical, a drumbeat of survival. This wasn't ceremony anymore, not for her, this was her vow. The one whispered into the sand when she knelt by her brother's grave. I won't leave what you left undone. That vow carried her here, to this courtyard, to this test, to this step. But there was something she never told anyone. Not her commanders, not the guard, not even herself fully. Something waiting, buried deep in the dark corners of her memory. And it was coming. The guard stopped, turned, his gaze locked on hers, a pause. The kind of pause that tears open a person from the inside. Her throat tightened, her lips parted, her body wanted to tremble, but she held it still. Would he see through her? Would he know the truth she carried, the weight she refused to speak? The silence stretched until it felt like stone pressing against her chest. Then one word, quiet, sharp, unyielding. Hold. She froze. And in that frozen second, realization struck like lightning. This wasn't about tradition. This wasn't about performance. This was about her, about whether she still believed in the vow, about whether she still had control. Her heart answered before her mind did. Yes. She held. And in that holding, she found what she thought she had lost. Control, not of war, not of death, not of the past, but of herself. For now. But even as the silence settled, she knew. It wouldn't last. The past always finds its way back. And hers was already moving toward her, step by step. Why did the silence feel heavier at night? It wasn't the absence of sound, the night was never silent. There was always something, a hum of generators, the whine of rotors in the distance, the snap of a tarp in desert wind. But the silence she carried wasn't about the air outside, it was the one inside her. The silence of being watched, judged, questioned without words. Her first deployment had taught her that. They told her she was lucky to be chosen, that she was the exception, that most never got this chance. But she learned quickly that exceptions cut both ways. The men never said it aloud, not in front of officers, not when it could be heard, but she caught it in the small things, a glance at briefing tables, the slight hesitation when gear was handed out, the low laughter when her back was turned. And still she pushed forward, because she had no other choice. But the night it all fractured, she remembered in detail that never left her. The mission was supposed to be simple. A patrol through a strip of road carved between old clay walls. The kind of place where silence pressed in so close you could feel it against your skin. She was posted high, her rifle balanced against her shoulder, breath slowing as her eyes sank into the scope. Everything narrowed. The world became shadows, angles, lines of movement. She was steady. She was calm. Then it happened. First, the static of a comm crackled in her ear. Then the burst of gunfire, sharp, sudden, chaos in seconds. Her heart slammed against her ribs as figures darted into her lens. Two of her unit were down, pinned behind a broken wall. Another fired blindly, dust clouding his vision. She scanned fast, faster, the world a blur until... There, a boy, young, running from the corner of a building, something in his hand. Her breath caught, her finger hovered. She wanted to believe it was nothing. She wanted to believe he was just running, just scared, just human. But she couldn't. Not with the men below screaming into her radio, not with the seconds bleeding out. She fired. The recoil pressed her back. The boy fell. The sound was small, soft, almost swallowed by the chaos, but it was louder than anything else she had ever heard. The firefight ended minutes later. Her unit lived. They said she saved them. They said she made the call no one else could have. But when she climbed down from that rooftop, when her boots sank into the dust, no one met her eyes. No one spoke. And in that silence she felt the fracture. Trust had been spared, but her own soul it had splintered. She didn't cry, not then, not ever. She folded the silence around herself like armor, and she told herself she would carry it alone. Years later, she still did. Standing in the courtyard under the guard's gaze, the tourists watching, the memory burned fresh. She could almost smell the gunpowder again, almost hear the static, almost feel the boy's weight pressing against her chest, even though she had never touched him. And maybe that was why she endured. Maybe that was why she chose silence over anger, because if she ever spoke, if she ever told them what she saw in her scope that night, the silence would break. And she would too. But her brother, it was always her brother's voice that brought her back. He had been the first to believe in her, the one who told her she wasn't defined by their doubts, that she had a place here, that she had earned it. He wrote to her from his own deployment, words scrawled fast, uneven, sometimes stained with sweat or dirt. He told her about the heat, about the loneliness, about the way nights stretched too long. But always at the end, he told her the same thing. Keep going, don't stop. They'll never see you coming until it's too late. And then one day, the letters stopped. The news came like a stone dropped into water, no warning, no explanation. Just the ripple of silence spreading outward until it drowned her whole. Her brother was gone, ambushed on a road at dawn, no survivors. She had been thousands of miles away, standing in a chow line when the call came. She remembered the tray in her hands, the taste of metal in her mouth, the way her knees almost buckled. They didn't let her fly back. They said it wasn't practical. They said there was no time. They said other missions needed her. So she buried him in silence, alone. And when she folded his flag, her hands trembling, her tears hidden, she whispered a vow into the ground. I'll finish what you started. I won't leave what you left undone. That vow became her mission. Now in this courtyard under the flag, under the eyes of strangers, she felt the vow like fire in her blood. The guard's stare was unrelenting, his steps precise, but he wasn't her enemy, not really. He was a mirror, a test of whether she could still stand. The cough from the tourists echoed again in her memory. That small laugh, mocking, thoughtless, it hurt more than gunfire, because it reminded her of all the times her worth was questioned. But she stood, because that was all she had left. She thought of the men she had served with, the ones who never knew her story. There was Ray's, who always hummed old songs before firefights, as if he could drown out fear with melody. He never told anyone why he did it, until one night by the fire he admitted his mother used to sing them to him before she passed. There was Daniels, who carried a photo folded so many times it was falling apart. A wife, a baby girl. He told her once he hadn't held his daughter yet, not once. He kept the picture close because he was afraid he'd forget her face. And there was Carter, the medic, who hid his shaking hands behind gloves too tight. He patched men together with skill and grit, but at night he couldn't sleep. Not since the day he lost his best friend in training, before they ever deployed. They all carried something, just like her. That was what made them human, what made their silence heavy, what made every step forward matter. The guard halted again. His boots struck stone. His gaze lifted toward the flag. For a moment the world seemed to stop breathing. She felt it again, that pull inside her, the war between silence and voice, between staying small and standing tall. Her throat ached with words she couldn't say, words like "I belong here," words like "I've earned this," words like "I've given more than you'll ever know." But she didn't speak, she couldn't. Instead, she let her silence speak for her. And in that silence, she realized something she hadn't before. Discipline wasn't just about obedience. It was about survival. It was about carrying what no one else could see and doing it without breaking. She wasn't sure if that made her strong or just stubborn. But in this moment, it was enough. The tourists shifted again. Cameras clicked. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve, pointing at her. The mother whispered something back, something soft, something she couldn't hear. The guard's voice rang out once more. "Stand fast." She did. And in that instant she felt the weight of every rooftop, every letter, every silence she had carried. It pressed against her. It hurt, but it also held her upright. And for the first time in years, she wondered, maybe this wasn't just about finishing her brother's vow. Maybe it was about finding her own. But then the sound. A voice in the crowd, different this time, not mocking, not cruel, just curious. Why doesn't she move? The question pierced through her like a blade, because she didn't know the answer herself, not fully, not yet. But she would. And when she did, the silence would finally break. What made a mission impossible? The lack of numbers, the lack of intel, or the lack of belief. She had faced all three before, but this one was different. They didn't call it impossible in the reports. They called it high risk. They used words like discretion advised and voluntary assignment, but everyone in the room knew what it meant. No one was expected to come back. And still she volunteered. Why? That was the question, whispered in hallways, muttered in tents, scribbled in margins of logs. Why her? Why would she step forward when even the veterans with hollow eyes stayed back? She didn't answer them. She couldn't, because the answer wasn't for them. It was for her brother. The mission was simple in theory. Extract a family trapped behind shifting lines. A father, mother, 2 children. Locals who had helped. Locals who were marked for death the moment they gave up information. But the roads were cut off. Enemy patrols swarmed. Every path in was a choke point. Every path out was a kill zone. Command called it too late. Resources stretched thin. Risks outweighed value. But she remembered her brother's letters. The way he wrote about kids in villages who passed notes for food. The way he told her, these aren't numbers, they're faces. Remember that when the paperwork tells you otherwise. So when the room went quiet, when the air grew heavy with the silence of men unwilling to sign their own death warrant, she stood. "I'll go." And the silence broke like glass. They told her she'd need a team. She told them she'd take anyone willing. In the end, only 3 joined her, not out of belief but out of something harder, loyalty. Ray's, Daniels, Carter. The men who carried their own ghosts, the men who knew hers without asking. They loaded gear in silence, checked weapons without jokes, adjusted straps without words, because there was nothing to say. Everyone knew what this was. The night before, she sat alone, cleaning her rifle until the metal gleamed. Her hands moved steady, practiced, but her mind wandered. What if this was it? What if the silence finally swallowed her whole? She thought of her brother's grave, of the vow whispered into sand, "I'll finish what you started." And she realized if she died out there, it wouldn't be for command. It wouldn't even be for herself. It would be for that family, for their chance, for something her brother would have done without hesitation. The night of the mission, the desert air was sharp, cold enough to sting, but dry enough to choke. The sky was a canvas of stars, each one a reminder of how small they were beneath it. They moved in silence, shadows against shadows, boots pressed soft into sand, eyes scanning the horizon, every sound amplified, a breath, a click, the faint rustle of fabric. She led, not because she wanted to, but because they let her, because they needed her to. The first checkpoint came fast. Two men at a post, rifles slung carelessly, their silhouettes outlined by a lantern glow. She raised her fist. The team froze. Her scope slid into place. Breath slowed, heart slowed, the world narrowed. One shot, then another, quiet, clean, the lantern flickered, then darkness. The road opened. Hours stretched, each minute a battle of nerves, every corner a question mark, every shadow a threat. And then finally the house, clay walls cracked, windows boarded, a single lantern flickering inside. She signaled. Carter moved first, soft steps. Ray's covered, Daniels watched the rear. The door creaked open. Inside, a family huddled, wide eyes, faces pale with fear, two children clinging to their mother's dress. The father spoke fast, words spilling in a language she didn't know but understood. Relief, terror, hope. She knelt, lowered her weapon. "We're here, we're getting you out." The boy, no older than 10, stared at her rifle, stared at her hands. His eyes reminded her of another boy, one she couldn't save, one she couldn't forget. Her chest tightened, but she forced a smile, forced strength into her voice. "We'll keep you safe." The extraction should have ended there, quiet exit, back through the shadows. But nothing stayed quiet, not in war. The first shot rang out before they cleared the road, then another, a spray of fire cutting through darkness. Shouts erupted, boots thundered, the night lit up with muzzle flashes. "Contact!" Rays shouted, returning fire. Daniels pulled the family down, shielding them with his own body. Carter dragged the mother behind a wall, his hands trembling but steady where it counted. She dropped to a knee, sighted fast, returned fire. Each shot precise, each breath controlled, but they were outnumbered. Too many, too fast. And for the first time she thought maybe they were right. Maybe this was impossible. Her mind raced. Options collapsed. The family's faces burned into her vision. Her brother's voice whispered in her memory. "Don't stop, keep going." She scanned fast. There, a break in the wall, a path narrow enough for one at a time. A chance. "Move," she shouted, voice sharp, commanding. Rays laid cover fire. Daniels pushed the family through. Carter stumbled but followed. Bullets cracked stone inches from their heads. She stayed last, always last. Her rifle barked until the chamber clicked empty. She swapped mags, hands steady even as her breath burned. Then a shout. Ray's hit, shoulder torn, blood staining his sleeve. She pulled him up, dragged him toward the break. He resisted at first, teeth clenched, but her glare silenced him. "No one stays behind," she growled. And he moved. They pushed through, narrow streets, shouts behind them, boots pounding closer. Every turn was a gamble, every shadow a trap, but somehow they kept moving. Then the final stretch, open ground, no cover, the extraction point beyond it. Her gut twisted. It was too far, too exposed, too much. But there was no choice. She turned to Rays, bleeding but alive. To Daniels, holding the little girl close. To Carter, wide-eyed but steady. To the family, trembling, clutching each other like a lifeline. And she thought of her brother, of his words, of his silence. She nodded once. "We run." And they did. Bullets sliced air, sand exploded underfoot, shouts grew louder. She ran until her lungs burned, until her legs screamed. She ran with everything she had, every vow, every memory, every ghost pushing her forward. And somehow they made it. The roar of rotors cut through chaos. The extraction bird swooped low, dust whipping. Hands pulled the family inside, pulled Ray's, pulled Daniel's, pulled Carter. She was last, always last. A bullet tore past her ear. Another grazed her side, pain seared, hot, sharp. But she didn't stop. Hands grabbed her, dragged her inside. The bird lifted, the ground fell away. And she collapsed against the metal floor, chest heaving, vision blurred. The family clung together. Daniels wept quietly, the girl still in his arms. Ray's gritted his teeth, blood soaking his sleeve. Carter's hands shook as he wrapped bandages. And she sat in silence, because that was all she knew. Later, command called it a success, a miracle, a mission no one believed possible. But she didn't see victory. She saw the boy in her scope. She saw her brother's grave. She saw silence stretching on, heavy as stone. And she wondered, was survival enough? Or was there still something she hadn't faced? The dust had barely settled when the silence returned. Not the silence of empty rooms or lonely nights. Not the silence of memories she buried deep enough to choke. This silence was heavier. It pressed against her ears as the helicopter lifted higher, carrying them away from fire and chaos, away from the place they were never supposed to survive. The family clung together. The mother's face streaked with tears, her hands wrapped tight around her children as though she could still feel bullets chasing them. The father sat rigid, his eyes darting, disbelieving, as if the metal walls of the aircraft might melt and drop them back into the storm they'd fled. Her men sat opposite, Ray's bleeding through bandages but grinning with that grim kind of pride soldiers wore when they realized they weren't corpses yet. Daniel still clutching the little girl's hand as if afraid she'd vanish if he let go. Carter quiet, too quiet, his rifle across his knees, fingers tapping restlessly against the stock. And she just sat there, back pressed against cold steel, rifle still in her lap, blood seeping from the graze along her ribs, the burn raw but ignored, her eyes fixed forward, unfocused, her breath shallow. Because she wasn't celebrating survival. She was calculating the cost. The debrief came hours later. A sterile room, fluorescent lights that hummed like gnats, commanders in pressed uniforms, eyes sharp, pens scratching notes onto files that would never smell of blood or sand. They called it extraordinary, they called it brave, they called it a testament to will and discipline. They asked questions about routes, numbers, tactics. They wanted details. Clean, organized details that fit neatly into the report they'd already started drafting. She answered with short words, precise, detached. Yes. 4 men at the first checkpoint. Extraction under fire. 2 magazines expended. She didn't tell them about the boy's eyes. She didn't tell them about Ray's hand slipping from hers in the chaos. She didn't tell them about the way her lungs had burned, how she had tasted iron and sand and doubt with every breath. They didn't want that. They wanted victory, and she gave them the shape of it, not the weight, never the weight. After the room emptied, she lingered, alone. The silence returned again, pressing against her skull until it throbbed. Her fingers trembled when she unbuttoned her uniform, revealing the wound along her side. A clean graze, painful but shallow, nothing compared to the scars buried deeper. She touched it anyway, pressed her palm against the sting, not because of the pain, but because it reminded her she was still here. Alive. And for some reason, that felt heavier than death. Days passed. Ray's shoulder was patched. Daniels received quiet commendations for bravery under fire. Carter stayed withdrawn, chain-smoking until his hands smelled permanently of ash. The family was moved to a safe zone, given food, clothing, a promise of passage to somewhere far from the war. On paper, it was done. But in her head, it was. She couldn't sleep. When she closed her eyes, the boy's face returned, his wide stare fixed on her rifle, his silence echoing her own. When she walked the compound, she felt eyes on her, whispers behind her back. Some called her reckless, others called her a hero. Neither word sat right. Both felt like stones pressing into her chest. At night, she cleaned her rifle again and again, each motion mechanical, each click of metal against metal steady. Her hands needed the routine. Her mind needed the distraction. But silence always returned. One evening, Daniels found her alone by the perimeter fence. He didn't approach immediately. He just stood a few feet away, lighting a cigarette, exhaling slow. "You know," he said finally, voice low, "you scared the hell out of me." She didn't look at him, just stared into the dark beyond the wire where the desert stretched endless. "You think we weren't scared too?" he added, forcing a rough laugh. "Still nothing." Daniel sighed. "Reyes keeps saying you saved his life. Carter, he doesn't say it, but he knows you did too. The family god, they look at you like you're some kind of angel." Her jaw tightened. The word cut sharper than any bullet. "I'm not," she whispered. Daniels frowned, stepping closer. "Then what are you?" She turned to him then, her eyes hard, distant. "A soldier." He waited, but nothing more came. Nothing ever did. And eventually he walked away, shaking his head. Weeks later, the whispers shifted. A new mission was brewing. Not another extraction, not rescue, something darker, a strike. Precision, they called it. Necessary, they called it, but she recognized the tone. This wasn't about saving. This was about erasing. And somehow, command wanted her. She sat in the briefing room again. Different maps, different names, different targets. But the same silence. A village suspected of harboring insurgents, coordinates marked with red ink, buildings circled, routes drawn. "Your team will insert here," the officer explained, tapping the map. "Quick, surgical, no room for error." Reyes shifted in his seat, his shoulder still stiff but functional. Daniels rubbed his temples. Carter avoided everyone's gaze. And she just stared at the map. Not at the lines, not at the marks, but at the tiny square drawn near the center. A school. Her throat tightened. She remembered the family, the children clinging to their mother's dress, the boy's eyes fixed on her rifle. And she realized this wasn't about insurgents, not entirely. This was about control, about fear, about sending a message. And once again, the silence inside her grew loud. That night she stood alone in her quarters, staring at the map folded on her desk. Her brother's voice echoed in memory. "These aren't numbers, they're faces." She pressed her palms against her temples, willing the thought away. But it wouldn't leave. It never left. Was she saving families or destroying them? Was her silent strength or cowardice? The questions burned, unrelenting. And for the first time, she wasn't sure she could keep carrying them alone. The morning came, orders in hand, weapons cleaned, the team assembled. Reyes gave her a nod. Daniels gave her a tired smile. Carter said nothing. And she adjusted her rifle strap, tightened her gloves, and swallowed the knot in her throat. Because no matter what burned inside, the world outside demanded one thing of her. Silence. But this time, as the helicopter blades roared to life, she wondered. How much longer before silence broke her? The desert wind carried a taste of dust and metal as the helicopter dropped low, blades chopping the night into fragments of sound. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, not the map, not the coordinates, just the empty stretch of dark sand glowing faintly under moonlight. Because the map haunted her. That tiny square in the center, the school. She hadn't said it out loud, hadn't dared to break the chain of orders, but it lived in her chest like a ticking clock. She adjusted her headset, feeling the pressure of the band against her skull. Her team sat around her in silence. Ray's chewing gum furiously, jaw tight. Daniel's whispering a quiet prayer he thought no one could hear. Carter just staring at the floor, eyes hollow, fingers drumming against his rifle as if keeping rhythm with his own nerves. And she breath slow, steady, rehearsing calm. But inside, a storm raged. What if children were inside? The thought burrowed deep, looping again and again. The mission called it a target structure, a sterile phrase stripped of humanity. But to her, it was a place where laughter might echo, where chalk might scrape against board, where crayons might color paper. Not just walls, not just bricks, faces. Her brother's voice lingered. They're not numbers, they're faces. They touched down a mile out, sand blasting against boots as they disembarked. Engines cut. Silence swallowed the desert again. Rays took point, scanning with night vision. Daniels covered rear. Carter checked the drone feed flickering on his tablet. 2 heat signatures at the perimeter, Carter muttered. Armed. Armed, that word gave permission. Armed meant enemy. But she knew better. Armed could mean desperate, hungry, afraid. They moved out, shadows slipping between dunes, boots silent against soft sand, every step calculated, every breath measured. Her rifle pressed against her shoulder, scope scanning, heart thudding. At the first ridge they spotted them, 2 men by a small fire. Old rifles slung carelessly, conversation low. Not insurgents, farmers maybe, locals. Their weapons looked rusted, untouched by real war. Rays raised his hand, ready to signal. The rules of engagement gave them clearance. Eliminate, move on. But she caught his wrist, shaking her head. His eyes narrowed behind goggles. Why? She whispered, barely audible, not combatants. Rays hesitated, torn between orders and trust. Then with a low grunt he relented. They moved wide, leaving the men by their fire, unaware that death had nearly brushed their shoulders. Minutes stretched. The village appeared in the distance, dim shapes against pale moonlight, clay walls, thin smoke rising from a chimney, dogs barking faintly, then silenced. Her throat tightened. There it was, the square, the school. Carter checked his screen. Thermals picking up at least 12 inside. Some movement smaller, could be kids. The words hung heavy. Rays cursed under his breath. Daniels froze, muttering another prayer. And she felt the world tilt. Children. Command hadn't mentioned this. Command never would. Orders were clear. Sweep, secure, neutralize. But orders hadn't seen the girl clutching her mother's hand. Orders hadn't seen the boy staring at her rifle with silent eyes. She clenched her jaw, her hands shaking against her weapon. If she followed orders, she'd be complicit. If she didn't, she'd break chain of command, risk everything. The silence inside her screamed. Rays whispered, "What's the play?" All eyes turned to her. Because despite hierarchy, despite ranks, they trusted her. She had carried them out of fire before. She had dragged Rays by his vest, had shielded Daniels with her own body, had pulled Carter from near collapse. And now they waited. Her lips parted, but no words came, only breath. She remembered the debrief, the fluorescent lights, the neat reports, how easy it was to reduce chaos into numbers. She couldn't let these kids become numbers. Hold position, she whispered finally. Confusion rippled, Rays frowned, Daniels blinked, Carter tilted his head. Hold, Rays hissed, orders were clear. Her voice steadied, something's off, we wait. Minutes passed like hours. They crouched in shadow, the school looming ahead, faint voices carrying on the wind. She closed her eyes, listening. Not shouts, not commands, not the rhythm of insurgents drilling or plotting. Laughter. Soft, pure, children's laughter. Her heart clenched. Then another sound. Engines, low rumble, distant but growing. She opened her eyes, scanning the horizon, headlights cutting through dust, a convoy not theirs. Movement incoming, Carter whispered, his screen lighting up. 5 vehicles, armed heavily. Reyes swore again. Daniels tightened his grip on his rifle. And she understood. The school wasn't the target, it was bait. A trap. Command hadn't cared. They wanted the strike regardless. Whether it meant drawing fire or collateral damage, it didn't matter. Her silence broke inside, shattering like glass. She acted fast. New plan, she ordered. We intercept the convoy before it reaches the school. Reyes stared at her. That's suicide. Daniels whispered, if they get here, the kids are dead. Carter shook his head, panic rising. We weren't sent for this. Her voice cut through, sharp but steady. We're not letting them turn this school into a battlefield, not tonight. The choice lay before them. Follow orders or follow conscience. And slowly, one by one, they nodded. They set ambush at the ridge, weapons braced, breaths controlled. The convoy approached, 5 trucks, guns mounted, men shouting above the engines. Dust trails behind them like scars across the desert. Her finger rested on the trigger, heart pounding. When the first truck crossed the marker, she fired. A clean shot, the driver slumped, the vehicle swerved, crashing into sand, chaos erupted. Reyes opened fire, controlled bursts. Daniels covered flank, prayers dissolving into curses. Carter unleashed hell, his fear transformed into fury. They fought like shadows, striking hard, fatting, striking again. Gunfire cracked, dust exploded, metal screamed. The convoy faltered, men fell, engines died. But the cost was real. Reyes took a hit to the leg, collapsing with a shout. Daniels nearly lost his footing under suppressive fire. Carter's tablet shattered, drone feed gone. And she pushed forward, eyes blazing. Not for orders, not for medals, but for the children in that school. She moved like fire through smoke, precise, ruthless, relentless. When silence finally returned, broken only by crackling flames of wrecked trucks, she stood among the wreckage, chest heaving, rifle low. The school stood untouched behind them. Reyes groaned, clutching his leg. You're insane. Daniels laughed breathlessly, almost hysterical. Insane or a damn angel. Carter sat shaking, face pale. Do you know what this means? Command will bury us. We disobeyed, we. She cut him off, voice calm, quiet, certain. No, we did what was right. The words hung in the air, heavy, final. Later, as they evacuated, she didn't look back at the wreckage. But she heard it, the faint sound of children's laughter drifting from the school. Alive, safe. And for the first time, the silence inside her didn't feel like a cage. It felt like peace. But she knew peace never lasted. The hangar lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh white across the concrete floor. The air smelled of fuel, metal, and sweat. She sat rigid on the bench, boots planted, hands clasped so tight her knuckles whitened. Across from her, command lined up in pressed uniforms, medals pinned like armor. Their faces were unreadable masks, except for the flicker of disapproval etched deep in their eyes. The debrief this time was no celebration. It was a trial. The officer at the center, gray hair, square jaw, leaned forward, voice clipped. You were given direct orders. Neutralize the target structure. Complete the sweep. She kept her gaze level, silent. He tapped the file in front of him. Instead, you diverted, engaged an unauthorized convoy, caused significant collateral damage, risked your team's lives, and most importantly, disobeyed. The word landed like a hammer. Disobeyed. Behind her, Reyes shifted on crutches, jaw tight. Daniels sat still, eyes on the floor, lips moving silently in some prayer for mercy. Carter looked hollow, shoulders hunched, as if bracing for a storm. The officer's voice cut sharper. Explain yourself. The room held its breath. And still she said nothing. Because she knew explanations didn't matter here. They didn't want truth. They wanted obedience. Silence was her only shield. The officer slammed his palm on the table. You endangered this mission. Do you understand the gravity? Do you comprehend what insubordination means in wartime? Her chest rose with a steady breath. Her eyes burned, but her lips stayed sealed. Because if she spoke, if she said the word children, they'd twist it, reduce it, file it away under unconfirmed presence of civilians. Another footnote, another erased truth. And she couldn't bear to watch their pens scratch life into nothing. So she kept her silence. Finally, the verdict came. Her record blemished, her rank frozen, future missions restricted. Officially, failure to comply. Unofficially, a scarlet mark across her name. Her team shared the weight. Ray's cursed under his breath when the officers left. Daniels muttered that God would judge differently. Carter just walked out, head low, chain-smoking until the hallway reeked of ash. And she sat alone, staring at the empty table where the verdict still echoed. Not guilty, not innocent, just silent. That night she lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. Sleep refused her. The boy's eyes returned. The laughter of children in the school replayed. The sound of rifles cracking, trucks burning, men screaming. And her brother's voice again. They're not numbers, they're faces. She pressed her palms against her ears, as though she could block the noise, but it lived inside now. Silence was no longer her shield, it was her prison. Days blurred. Her team fractured. Rays grew bitter, limping across the compound, muttering about wasted blood. Daniels grew softer, more devout, convinced their punishment was a test of faith. Carter disappeared into himself, his silence darker than hers, his eyes hollow pits. And she trained. Hours in the range, hours in the gym, sweat pouring, muscles burning, lungs screaming. Punishment turned inward, every repetition a plea for clarity. But clarity never came. Only exhaustion, only silence. Then came the news. The family they'd rescued, the mother, the father, the children, they were gone. Not dead, relocated, shifted across borders under protective custody. No details given, no contact allowed. Their names erased in bureaucracy, swallowed by classified ink. Her chest hollowed at the words. Because she had risked everything for them, bled for them, watched her team nearly break for them, and now vanished. Erased. Numbers. And for the first time her silence cracked. She slammed her fist into the barracks wall until plaster split and her knuckles bled. Rays shouted at her to stop. Daniels tried to pray over her. Carter just walked away. But nothing stopped the storm inside. One evening Daniels found her by the wire fence again. Same spot, same night wind. "You can't keep carrying this alone," he whispered. She didn't answer. "You think silence makes you strong, but it's breaking you." Still nothing. He crouched, voice softer. "You saved those kids. You did what we all knew was right. Why won't you let yourself believe it?" Her eyes burned, but no words came. Because if she admitted it was right, she'd also admit how close it had been to wrong. How close her silence had come to costing lives instead of saving them. Weeks later, a new assignment arrived. Not a mission, a transfer. Remote base, frozen mountains, a posting designed for ghosts. A quiet exile. Her punishment disguised as necessity. Rays raged, Daniels wept, Carter didn't react. And she just nodded, packed her gear, strapped her rifle to her back. Silence as acceptance. The mountains greeted her with cold that bit through bone, white stretched endless, snow swallowed sound. Here silence was not just inside, it was everywhere. She patrolled ridges, breath turning to mist, boots crunching against ice. Alone, forgotten. Nights stretched long, stars burned sharp, wolves howled in the distance. Her hands grew raw from the cold. Her eyes grew heavy from endless white. And in that silence, her brother's voice returned stronger. "They're not numbers, they're faces." But there were no faces here. No civilians, no children, just endless snow. And for the first time, she wondered if command had succeeded. Not in breaking her body, not in erasing her record, but in making her silence permanent. Then one night, a flare ripped across the sky. Red against black, urgent. Her radio crackled, a voice she hadn't heard in months. "Contact, patrol down, multiple hostiles, coordinates." Static swallowed the rest. Her heart slammed. The war had followed her here. And for the first time she realized silence would no longer be enough. Because lives waited in the snow. And she had to decide. Stay silent or act. The flare still burned red in her mind as she sprinted across the ridge, boots carving into ice, breath sharp against the night. The mountains stretched endless and cruel. Snow whipped sideways in gusts, stinging her cheeks. Each step sank deep, slowing her legs, but she forced herself forward, rifle bouncing against her shoulder. Her radio spat static, then fragments of words, patrol down hostiles, then silence. Silence. Always silence. But this time, it wasn't the silence of choice. It was the silence of men dying somewhere in the snow. Her heart pounded. The first body appeared at the crest of a drift. Face pale against crimson-stained snow, eyes wide open, staring at stars that offered no comfort. His rifle lay broken beside him, hands frozen stiff around it. She crouched, closing his eyes with gloved fingers. No name, just another erased face. Her brother's voice whispered again, "They're not numbers, they're faces." She rose jaw tight, rifle ready, and pressed on. Gunfire cracked through the storm, muffled but sharp. She dropped to her stomach, crawling over icy ridges, snow burning against her skin, peered through her scope. Below in the valley, chaos burned against white. A small squad, 3 men, trapped behind an overturned snowcat. Muzzle flashes lit their fear. Bullets cut arcs into snow, splintering wood crates stacked nearby. Across the slope, shadows moved. Hostiles, 8, maybe 9, heavy coats, rifles glinting in the cold, coordinated, advancing. Her squad mates, no, she didn't know these men. Their uniforms were different. Reinforcements from another sector, perhaps, faces unfamiliar. But that didn't matter. They were outnumbered, alone. And she was the ghost in the ridge. Her scope steadied, breath controlled. One shot, the lead hostile dropped, blood misting against snow. Confusion rippled. The squad behind the snowcat looked up, startled. She fired again, and again, each crack sharp, cutting through the storm. 2 more fell. The enemy turned, shouting into the dark, searching for her, firing blind. But she was already moving, crawling sideways across the ridge, never lingering, always shifting, a shadow among shadows. The squad below rallied. One man shouted, voice hoarse. Another pushed forward, firing with renewed fury. Her shots carved openings, their courage filled them. And together, strangers in snow, they began to hold. The firefight stretched minutes that felt like hours. Bullets hissed past her ear, ice exploded around her. Breath turned ragged, fingers numbed on her trigger. She thought she would freeze, thought she would fall. But she didn't stop. Because each shot wasn't just for survival, it was for memory, for the boy's eyes, for the girl's hand clutching her mother's dress, for her brother's voice that never left her. Faces, always faces. When the last hostile fell, silence returned again. But this silence was different. Not suffocating, not empty. This silence was earned. She rose, sliding down the ridge toward the squad. Her boots slipped, caught, dug in. Snow clung to her legs, her gloves stiff with cold. The men stared as she approached. one with a bloodied bandage on his arm, one gasping through cracked lips, one barely standing, rifle trembling in his hands. Their eyes widened when they saw her, slim figure in frostbitten gear, rifle steady, face streaked with snow and dirt. "You're," one stammered, "you're the one they—" He didn't finish. She just nodded, silent, and began to check their wounds. The youngest of them, barely 20, freckles still visible beneath grime, flinched when she touched his side. A shallow wound, painful but not fatal. He whispered, voice shaking, "I thought we were done." Her hand lingered, pressing gauze into place. She met his eyes. And though her lips never moved, her silence told him, not tonight. Tears filled his eyes. He looked away, ashamed. They moved slowly back to base, dragging wounded, leaving tracks across endless white. No cheers greeted them, no officers, just the howling wind. But for those three men, she had been more than a shadow. She had been hope. Inside the outpost, heaters roared weakly, filling air with a metallic tang. They collapsed onto benches, shivering, groaning. The youngest soldier stared at her across the room, still shaken. Finally, he asked, "Why'd you do it?" She froze. He pressed on. "Command said you weren't to be trusted, said you broke orders, said you went rogue." The words stung, though she'd expected them. Her silence stretched. He leaned forward. "So why risk it? Why save us?" Her eyes softened, but her lips stayed closed. Because she couldn't explain, not to him, not yet. Because the truth was too heavy. Because the truth wasn't about war at all. It was about the children, about her brother, about the voices that haunted her silence. But how could she give that to a boy, still learning what bullets cost? So she simply looked at him until he looked away, ashamed again. That night, alone in her bunk, the silence pressed harder than ever. Not suffocating, not empty, but demanding. Demanding an answer she wasn't ready to give. Over the next days, whispers spread through the frozen base. The ghost of the ridge, the woman who defied orders, the sniper who saved men she didn't know. Some spoke with admiration, others with suspicion. Command spoke least of all. But she felt it, their eyes sharper, their grip tighter, their patience thinner. They hadn't broken her in the desert, now they would try in the snow. And yet something shifted inside her. For the first time, silence wasn't only her burden, it was her choice. A shield, a weapon, but also a language. When she looked at those three men, still alive, still breathing, she realized her silence had spoken louder than any order. And it terrified her. Because if silence could save, it could also condemn. The storm outside thickened, snow swallowed the world. Another flare would come, another fight. And she knew, deep in her chest, the true battle wasn't with enemies in the snow. It was with the silence inside her. And soon, it would demand more than she was willing to give. Why did she hesitate at the doorway? The snowstorm howled outside, the steel door rattling in its frame, but her boots didn't move. One hand gripped her rifle, the other lingered against the cold metal handle. Her squad was already gone, sent on another patrol, orders barked without pause. She wasn't chosen this time, not after the ridge, not after saving men she wasn't supposed to save. She had been told to stay behind, to wait, to reflect. But waiting felt like drowning. And reflecting meant facing the silence that never left her. She wandered the outpost's dim halls. Every step echoed. Heaters buzzed overhead, wires rattled against steel beams, boots thudded on hollow floors. Her breath fogged the air. Her hands trembled, not from cold, but from the memories pressing at her chest. Everywhere she looked, faces stared back, some alive, some gone, some never even here, only ghosts of children she couldn't save. Faces she could not forget. She paused at a supply room, leaning against the frame. Inside, a young medic sat on a crate, wrapping his hands. His eyes flicked up, then quickly down again, avoiding hers. He had spoken to her once days ago when the rumors swirled. He asked if it was true, if she really broke orders, if she really killed men outside her mission. She had only looked at him then, silent as ever. Now he muttered, almost to himself, "They say silence is safer than lies." Her chest tightened. She wanted to answer, wanted to tell him he was wrong. Because silence wasn't safe, silence burned. But her lips didn't move. She walked on. Later she stood on the perimeter, watching snow fall like ashes in the floodlights. Her gloves gripped the railing until her knuckles ached. And then, faint through the storm, she heard it. A sound that didn't belong. Not the wind, not the hum of generators. A faint hollow thunk, metal against snow. She froze, pulse spiking. Another sound followed, then another. Shadows moved at the edge of light, figures crawling low, too many. Her stomach dropped. The storm wasn't just storm. It was cover. She moved fast, boots pounding steel walkways, breath tearing at her lungs. Inside, the alarm should have been sounded, but the watchman on duty was gone, asleep, distracted, she didn't know. There wasn't time. Her silence had been a burden, a weapon, a shield. But now it had to be a warning. She slammed her hand against the alarm switch. Sirens split the night. Red lights spun across steel walls. Soldiers burst awake, scrambling, grabbing rifles. The base came alive in chaos. The first shots rang out before the men even reached their stations. Bullets cracked through the storm. Shadows advanced, rifles flashing. Grenades hissed into snowbanks. The base rattled with explosions. She was already on the wall, scope scanning, rifle snapping to targets. Every shot precise, every trigger pull a vow. But there were too many, too fast. And the silence inside her screamed, "This is not defense. This is sacrifice." The fight blurred into chaos, soldiers shouting, snow stained red, boots slipping on ice. She moved like instinct, cover to cover, firing, reloading, firing again. Men fell beside her, some she had spoken to, some she hadn't. Each fall echoed in her chest. And still the enemy came. Through the storm, through the walls, through everything. At one point she ducked behind a fuel drum, breath ragged. A corporal stumbled beside her, clutching his gut, blood soaking his uniform. He laughed, a broken sound. "They said you were cursed," he muttered, voice slurred. "Said anyone near you." He coughed blood, smiled faintly. "Guess I'd rather be cursed than dead in the snow." Then he went still. Her throat closed. Her silence became a scream she couldn't release. Hours or maybe minutes passed in that frozen war. Time lost meaning. What mattered was survival. What mattered was holding the line long enough for reinforcements that might never come. What mattered was refusing to let the silence win. And then it ended. The last hostile fell, the storm thinned, the night grew still again. The base was shattered, walls smoking, snow red and black, bodies scattered like broken promises. Of the dozens who had fought, only a handful stood. And she was still alive. Alive, but not untouched. Her rifle slipped from her hands, clattering into the snow. She sank to her knees. And for the first time since the beginning, since the boy's eyes, since her brother's voice, she let herself cry. Not loud, not heaving. Just silent tears, freezing against her cheeks. No one saw, or if they did, they pretended not to. Because some silences are sacred. The days that followed blurred again. Reports written, losses counted, command furious yet strangely quiet. No medals, no speeches. Just silence. The kind that lingers in halls, the kind that follows in footsteps. The kind that never leaves. She sat once more on her bunk, staring at the wall. Her hands shook, her chest ached. But deep inside, something shifted. Silence had broken her, carried her, defined her. But it wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to the faces she carried, to the men she saved, to the ones she lost. It was their silence now. A silence that spoke of sacrifice. A silence that no words could ever replace. Weeks later, she walked across a small village square, far from the war, far from the snow. Children played in the street. Women carried baskets. Life continued, untouched by battles fought in their name. She paused at a fountain, watching water spill clear and endless. A little girl ran past, laughing, ribbons trailing in her hair. For a moment, the soldier's chest tightened. She thought of the children she couldn't save. Then the girl glanced back and smiled, a smile that carried no fear, no silence, just life. The soldier turned, walking away. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Her silence was still with her, always with her. But for the first time, it didn't crush her. It carried her. And in that quiet, one truth remained. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.